Five Nights at Freddy's timelines are complicated, and even though we're only 4 videos into making one, I think it is an appropriate time to place the original Scott Cawthon games into the timeline. And to be fair, the placement of the games themselves has never been the most complicated part about making a timeline. That goes more so to ordering the events before the games happen, because so much of the early timeline takes place before any FNAF game. Hopefully a future Fall Fest game or the upcoming Into the Pit game can fix that. We don't know. They're not out yet. So as is tradition, we're just going to be shooting in the dark for that section. But building off of what we figured out so far and using canon dates that we have in the franchise, what order makes the most sense for the original 8 games made by Scott Cawthon? Essentially every FNAF game before Help Wanted. And as a reminder, everything I am going to say in this video, except for the very next section, and I'll specify when I'm breaking that, is speculation. None of this is fact. It's speculation built off of evidence and reasoned logic, but don't go touting this around as a confirmed list or anything. As has been said by many creators in the space, it is just a theory. But slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves said theory. Like I mentioned, in this first section I wanted to go over confirmed and factual dates and events, some kind of anchor that we can ground ourselves to. So what do we have? Man, I feel like I've been in here for weeks. It's even been a while since I've seen a paper. Okay, this will be helpful. Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. As an avid internet user, I've always put a VPN on my devices as a first step when I'm formatting them, especially if I know I'd be connecting to Wi-Fi signals I'm unfamiliar with, to protect myself and my data. Surfshark VPN encrypts your data so when you're on an internet signal other strangers may be connecting to, your information is safe. It can also mask your location, making you appear as if you're anywhere else in the world, which is a lifesaver for getting access to things like geo-locked content and apps. I've been keeping my phone on me, but it's been off this whole time because I was worried it would die before I could use it. Now seems like the perfect time. All I have to do is download Surfshark VPN, and just like that, I can make my location the United States and download a GPS app. Finally, now I can make some progress in this maze. If you want to try out Surfshark VPN absolutely risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee, go ahead and click the link in the description. And the folks over at Surfshark VPN were kind enough to give us an amazing deal. So use coupon code RYE, that's RYE, for an extra 3 months completely free. Thanks again to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring today's video. Surfshark VPN, online security made easy. Okay, looks like I've been heading north so far. Well, let's keep to it. Well, we do have 2 Fall Fest dates. Granted, the Fall Fest 83 banner is within Help Wanted, so its truth is up to suspect. However, I do think it's more safe to assume the 1970 Fall Fest poster we see in Help Wanted 2 is more factual. Regardless, both of them are noteworthy to mention here. It could be telling us a lot of things. After all, this could just be 2 Fall Fests, or it's more likely that this could be that Fall Fest ran from at the earliest 1970 to at least up until 1983. It's hard to tell. We know for a fact that the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was established in 1983. We do have the TV screen in the FNAF 4 minigame as supporting evidence, but the main evidence comes from the various coins in the franchise that all say Freddy Fazbear's Pizza established in 1983. We know for a fact that FNAF 2 takes place in 1987. After all, it's the date that's on the paycheck. The Missing Child incident doesn't have a confirmed date, but it is noteworthy that every book-based iteration of the Missing Child incident takes place in 1985. And since one of those books, Into the Pit from Fazbear Frights, is being made into a game, that date seems even more cemented in the game's continuity. We know that the Missing Child incident eventually shut down the original Freddy's within a year. Now, I say this mainly because FNAF 2 opens in 1987, and FNAF 2 is a reopening of Freddy's. Notably, this does go against something we get in that very same poster back in FNAF 1, because it mentions that that tragedy happened many years ago, which would imply that the Missing Child incident took place many years before the Freddy's closed down, not just 1 or 2. But I'm willing to omit this under the Help Wanted clause. The idea that Help Wanted is telling us that parts of the indie games made by the indie developer in-universe are inaccurate. I'm mainly willing to omit this because, in my opinion, we don't have a single Freddy's at this time that we know of that was open for many years. The original Freddy's was open for tops 2 to 3 years, Fredbear's wasn't a Freddy's, the FNAF 2 Freddy's was only open for a few months, and we don't know how long FNAF 1 Freddy's was open, but the posters are talking about a previous Freddy's location. location. So I'm willing to chalk this up to one of the indie game inaccuracies. We know that Follow Me, the minigames for FNAF 3, have to take place after FNAF 2, but before FNAF 3, because within that set of minigames, William Afton dies. Furthermore, it seems incredibly likely that it takes place after FNAF 1, judging from the layout of the building and the way the animatronics are disposed of. Even further, now this is pretty heavy speculation, but bear in mind, if Molten MCI is true and this timeline is using Molten MCI, Follow Me would also have to take place before Sister Location, because this seems to be the best time that William Afton was able to get remnant of the missing child incident. Speaking of Sister Location, that has to take place before FNAF 3, mainly because of that cutscene at the end of Custom Night where Michael says he's going to go after Springtrap, and presumably that's what he's doing in FNAF 3. FNAF 4 is a bit of a misnomer, but if they are Michael Afton's nightmares, they can pretty much take place any time in the timeline. Now, I do think Michael's nightmares are based off of his experiences being put in the nightmare test chambers. Essentially, I think William Afton did what we see in the story Didophobia. So they're just recurring nightmares and can theoretically be placed anywhere on the timeline. I do think they start happening after FNAF 1 though, because of all the references to FNAF 1 in the FNAF 4 nightmares. The minigames of FNAF 4, however, are much more important to place and more specific. However, they are difficult. 1983 has been a date that's been thrown out because of the TV screen, but I think it's also likely that that's just when the show began to air. We know at least that these minigames take place while Fredbear's is still open. And finally, we know that the last game in the timeline materially is FNAF 6. I say materially because it's likely that Ultimate Custom Night takes place afterwards, and who knows where FNAF World takes place? I mean, I think I do, but we'll get to it. But as far as games that take place in the actual real world of the FNAF universe, FNAF 6 is the last one of the Scott Cawthon games. So, those are our constants. That is pretty much the main facts we'll be working with as little speculation as possible. So, what variables am I going to throw in to spice up the blend? Well, all of the speculation I'm going to be using is built upon the videos I've been making in the past month or so. There's a playlist right here actually that I made with all of those videos to catch up if you haven't seen them, which will be helpful because I'll be leaving out details and pieces of evidence from those videos that do help to bolster my arguments here, but in the interest of time, I'm only going to be going over the major points. So if I ever say something that seems completely out of left field, go watch the video I'm referring to and hopefully I'll explain it there. And if I don't, oops. But in the future, if you're watching a video like this and you don't want to have to worry about missing previous videos and having to recap, maybe consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. It's really helpful for me. First of all, like I mentioned, I believe that William Afton was doing nightmare hallucination experiments akin to what we see in the story Didophobia. Essentially, I believe he was putting someone through a bare-bones recreation of what we see in FNAF 4. However, he was pumping those chambers full of hallucinogenic gas, so it seemed way more real, even though realistically it was probably closer to mannequins on sticks. I also think that after the bite that puts the crying child into a coma, William Afton puts Michael Afton into those testing chambers, partly so he has someone no one can check up on to experiment with, and as retribution for what happened to the crying child. I believe that Michael's time in these chambers are what forms the recurring nightmares we see in FNAF 4. So to be clear, I'm not saying being experimented on is what we're seeing in FNAF 4. I am saying what we're seeing in FNAF 4 are the PTSD nightmares Michael Afton has after being experimented on. It's very confusing there. I also believe that William taking Michael out of these chambers is a perfect manipulative method to get Michael to do whatever William wants him to. Essentially, William going like, hey, I saved you from these nightmares, now all you have to do is something for me. We know that William Afton manipulates Michael into going down into the sister location bunker. I also think that William manipulates Michael into working at FNAF 2 and FNAF 1 to try to get animatronic parts to do testing on Remnant. Essentially, I think William is manipulating Michael into being his guy on the inside. Moving on from Michael and William, I believe the original animatronics we see in the series were based off of felt suit characters from Fall Fest. In fact, I believe that Henry's main job when joining the company was converting these felt suit characters from Fall Fest into animatronics, and he got better each time. First was Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, then the original Freddy's cast, and by then he was so experienced, he made the Circus Baby Pizza World animatronics. However, I don't think Henry is the one who made them capable of child kidnapping. Rather, I think that was William's modifications to them after they were made, or rather his murderifications. And I know that's a big claim, but trust me, I've got a good feeling on it. You can go check out this video. Finally, in the timeline I've been cooking so far, I do believe that Elizabeth Afton was the first major death in the franchise. Then the crying child, then Charlotte Emily, and then the missing child incident. And I know Elizabeth being first is a little wacky, but I've got a good feeling about it. And if you want to know more details why, again, that specific video is right here. Alright, so with the constants we've established for the series, and the speculation that we've peppered into the mix, what kind of theory starts to rise when we put it in the oven? What kind of timeline are we baking here? Well, let's go over it, but again, focusing on the placement of the Scott Cawthon games, which admittedly will be a bit of an issue, because like I mentioned, there's a lot of ground to cover before you get any actual FNAF games. There are more events in the early timeline and more events in the timeline I'm going to be covering that I'm going to be brushing over for the purpose of this video, because right now I want to directly focus on correlating the games to placements in the timeline. Otherwise, this would be like an hour long, and I'm gonna save the long one for when I'm not ridden with allergies and we make the actual damn timeline. As far as I can see it, the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline begins with Fall Fest. I'm not exactly sure what happened here, because we have literally no direct information on this thing, but it seems like some traumatic event happened with fire. Maybe it was due to an animatronic setting up an early hatred towards Henry, or maybe it was something else entirely. We frankly have no information on this event, besides the dates 1970, 1983, and that several times Fall Fest is associated with fire. It is my speculation, however, Fall Fest was mainly manned originally by felt suit characters, most likely made by William Afton. Those characters were slowly being converted into animatronics by Henry Emily, and he was getting better every time. Eventually, they opened Fredbear's Family Diner with two of the fan favorite characters, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. That restaurant did well, and it inspired them to do more. After Fredbear's, they made Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with even more characters. And they were then on slate to make a new restaurant, Circus Baby's Pizza World, with even more characters from Fall Fest. Before the launch, William Afton had some modifications he made to the Circus Baby Pizza World animatronics. And frankly, here's my biggest issue with this timeline. I have no idea why William would want to convert the sister location animatronics to be child kidnapping professionals. Maybe something happened at Fall Fest, maybe it's related to the fire, hell, for all we know, maybe Sammy Emily really is in the games and he kicked William in the shins or something. I'm gonna be brutally honest here, don't know. And I think the lack of motivation here, possibly the biggest weakness of this timeline. Best I can say for now is that something happened at Fall Fest to inspire William to do this, and hopefully some future game can enlighten us if that's true. But after William converts the sister location animatronics to be murderous, we know how the launch of Circus Baby's Pizza World went. Just before it opens, Elizabeth is able to sneak off with Circus Baby and get alone, to which Circus Baby's Funtime programming takes over, and she scoops Elizabeth inside of her, killing her. From another room right as it's happening, Elizabeth's younger brother, the Crying Child, sneaks in and sees this go down. And after that, although the Crying Child still loves the characters his father creates, he's terrified of these animatronics. Circus Baby's Pizza World is cancelled, and the animatronics are shelved into the bunker underneath William Afton's house. Henry is confused as to what happened, possibly even blaming himself if he isn't aware of what William did. All he knows is that something went wrong. It's after this point that I do think the mini-games from FNAF 4 begin to happen. William Afton dives deeper into his studies and begins experimenting on fear and animatronics. After Elizabeth died to, frankly, his own negligence, he makes sure to watch his kids like a hawk, installing Fredbear plushie-looking cameras all over their house and surrounding neighborhood. He also makes sure to tell Michael Afton, his oldest son, to watch after his younger brother. Unfortunately for everyone involved, something that's going to become a recurring theme in this timeline, Michael Afton can't do anything right. In this instance, the constant bullying from Michael Afton to the Crying Child eventually leads to a head, where him and his friends prank the Crying Child by picking him up and hoisting his head into the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic while it's active, and when its jaw closes to talk, it crushes the Crying Child's head, putting him into a coma, literally doing the opposite of what Michael was told to do. After this, William takes an extreme step. He had already finished the testing chambers for his fear experiments, but instead of some random child, he uses Michael. After all, since it's his son, it would be less likely someone would try to find him, and it's sort of a sick retribution for killing the Crying Child. Michael is put into an endless nightmare loop of horrifying versions of the Freddy's characters in admittedly stripped down mannequin form, but those chambers are filled with hallucinogenic gas, making it feel all too real. Again, Note, I do not think this is the FNAF 4 gameplay. We'll get there when we get there. The crying child eventually dies from a coma and is buried in the woods. To try to keep Freddy's open and keep public faith, Henry installs the security puppet, an animatronic that will watch the kids at the restaurant and ensure no more children get too close to the animatronic. William, possibly out of spite or even possibly out of revenge, seeing that the two animatronics that killed his children were made by Henry Emily, goes to get revenge for himself. But as William arrives at the Freddy's location, he sees Charlotte Emily locked outside. And finally, an opportunity presents itself. William gets even with Henry and kills Charlotte Emily, leaving her body on the street. We learn in the story Alone Together that a spirit cannot gain their memories until their body is found, even if by themselves. Luckily for Charlie, her body is left on the street in public, so her body is found and her memories, presumably, are with her. This is what allows Charlotte to remain at the restaurant and possess the puppet. Henry seemingly retreats into grief, leaving William the perfect opportunity to continue killing, possibly as revenge to the children who bullied the crying child, or possibly to begin doing some other kind of experiment. So he commits the missing child incident. And since the bodies of those children are stuffed into the animatronic suits, never to be found, the children who die aren't even sure they're dead, being wandering spirits that remain at the Freddy's location. It's only until Charlotte sees them and leads them to find their bodies that they're able to regain their memories and possess those animatronics. After the missing child incident, the original Freddy's location closes. Quick check-in. Have you noticed something? Besides a minigame from FNAF 4, we are like 1,000 words into the timeline and still not a single Five Nights at Freddy's game has happened. This is what I'm talking about. The beginning structure of a FNAF timeline is so vague, yet so important, and we have no direct evidence to tell us anything that happens here. It is all speculation based off a minigame or a detail from the books. I can only hope that Into the Pit will remedy this, or possibly we'll get a Fall Fest game from Steelwool sometime in the future. But until then, this is the best we can do. Luckily, our first FNAF game of the timeline is happening very soon. Sometime after Freddy's closes in 1987, an entrepreneur tries to reinvigorate the Fazbear brand, buying the rights for it and opening staff for a new location. Henry hears the news and fears that William is the one who did all of those horrible acts. So, to make sure that the children at this new location would be safe, he joins on as an engineer and creates the toy animatronics. But Henry's efforts once again prove unhelpful, because William still manages to sneak a job at the new location, and while there commits 5 more murders of children, this time just leaving their bodies all over the restaurant. However, while he's doing this, he noticed that some of the animatronics are acting strangely, almost aggressive towards him, almost as if possessed. It's during this time that FNAF 2 takes place. But before he can go back and observe the animatronics more closely, the whole restaurant goes on lockdown and previous employees are not allowed in. William would need someone else to do this for him, and he just so happened to have an eldest son perfect for manipulation. Alright, bye Mark. Honestly, how bad my allergies are today, probably for the best. William goes back to the Nightmare Chamber bunker and quote-unquote saves Michael from them. To explain this manipulation, imagine it from Michael's perspective. He's stuck in this never-ending nightmare torture cycle, and suddenly they stop, and his father walks in, saying, "Son, I finally figured out how to save you from this. You just need to do one thing for me. And if you do it, not only will you be saved from this, but your little brother might be able to come back to life, and we can fix your mistake." So, of course, he would say yes. And admittedly, all Michael had to do was get a job at the FNAF 2 location and get some pieces from the animatronics so William could study them. But unfortunately for William, Michael can't do anything right. And although he got the job, he gets caught tampering with the animatronics on literally his first day, and is promptly fired. After that resounding failure, William just sends Michael back into the Nightmare Chambers. After the FNAF 2 location closes, as far as I'm aware, Henry just kind of fucks off. Everything he's tried has failed so far, so I'm sure he's filled with regret and remorse and just becomes an isolated shell of a man. But during that time, another entrepreneur tries to reinvigorate the Freddy's brand. They buy up the company, refurbish the animatronics, and just put out the most low-budget restaurant they can. And upon hearing the news that a new Freddy's is coming to town, William doesn't waste any time. He does the same song and dance again. saving Michael from the nightmares in the promise that he just needs to get some animatronic parts from these Freddy's characters. But William still hasn't learned. Michael can't do anything right. Five Nights at Freddy's 1 happens here. And by the end of the week, Michael is fired once again for tampering with the animatronics. Furthermore, at this point after FNAF 1, Michael's recurring real PTSD nightmares start to resemble what we see in the FNAF 4 gameplay. Michael Afton, however, finally catches a break, and William doesn't immediately send him back to the nightmare bunker. Yet anyway. William needs to go and do it himself, since clearly he's the only one that can. So he leaves specific instructions for Michael to follow in the case that he doesn't return. And the Follow Me minigames begin. Each night, William sneaks off to the now closed Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and disassembles one of the animatronics. Then he brings them back to the sister location bunker, melts it down into Remnant, and injects it into a Funtime animatronic. But after 4 nights of this, he's noticed that although these animatronics are starting to seem to come to life, they're unruly and hard to control. He would need the thing he's always used, his Spring Bonnie suit, something to remind them who's in charge. But on that 5th night, he's cornered by the spirits of his past, and in an attempt to save himself, he puts on the Spring Bonnie suit, getting spring-locked and dying in the process. After enough time passes, Michael deems William isn't coming back, and follows the instructions given to him. Then sister location happens pretty much exactly the way we see it, and unfortunately for everyone involved, Michael can't do anything right, because he does, admittedly, help the sister location animatronics to be free. But in doing so, they form into Ennard, scoop out all of his insides, wear his skin to exit, leave his skin when it begins rotting, and then he possesses himself. So, Ennard is free, and in a way, Michael Afton can't even die correctly. However, it's at that moment that Michael finally really knows what his father William is actually doing. So he vows to find William Afton and presumably kill him. This search goes on for decades without a hit until eventually Fazbear Frights is opened, a horror attraction based off of what happened at Freddy's. Michael, hopeful he'll find something to lead him towards William, gets a job there as the pretend night guard. Well, the real night guard that if the business is bad enough, he'll have to pretend to be a night guard. FNAF 3 is confusing conceptually. FNAF 3 happens, and William Afton is eventually shipped to this location. Michael just wanted like a lead, but instead it finds his entire father still alive somehow. So he burns the whole place to the ground in the hopes that it'll finally kill William Afton. Of course it doesn't, but Henry hears about the FNAF 3 fire on the news, and goes digging into William Afton, afraid that he might still be out there, might still be committing these horrible crimes. In his search, Henry finds the sister location bunker and the schematics within it, getting the full picture on the depravity of what William has done. And now that he knows this, Henry Emily hatches the Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, a plan to lure every player still in this game to one location and finally end it all. And it works. William Afton, Elizabeth Afton, Charlotte Emily, and the missing child incident kids in their current forms show up at the location. And to his surprise, Michael Afton, William's oldest son, shows up as well, looking worse for wear and having a sense that he also wants this to end. Finally, they flip the switch and they all burn to the ground. But after that fire, 2 spirits are still doing work. Charlotte is still holding on to the afterlife and trying to help any wayward souls that didn't fully burn away in the fire, and we see this in FNAF World. Cassidy, however, attached to William Afton, won't let him pass on so easily and torments him forever in his own purgatory in Ultimate Custom Night. And that, I think, is a pretty brief timeline of all of the Scott Cawthon FNAF games, mainly focusing on where the actual games take place. I left out a lot of details and a lot of motivations and frankly, a lot of characters, because I really wanted to just focus in on the actual game placements. So, TLDR, I think the correct order of the Scott Cawthon FNAF games in a chronological timeline is FNAF 2, FNAF 1, FNAF 4, Sister Location, FNAF 3, FNAF 6, FNAF World, and Ultimate Custom Night. And I'm talking about like the main gameplay of these games. The mini games are scattered throughout. But what do you think so far? Is there any evidence that could help the major flaw with this timeline? Or is there evidence that directly goes against something that I've said here? I'd love to know in the comments, because this timeline is still actively being shaped and molded and is subject to change if I think of something or someone tells me something better. In the meantime, like I said, if you're standing there like, why did they say XYZ? All of the videos I'm making in preparation for making a timeline are in one playlist that I've just put together, and you can find the link right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to use #RightTart. A huge shout out to the best channel members, the Dough Risers. Until next time, as always, stay toasty slices.